Hey everyone, it's Sharon with the Cozy Junk Studio. Let's do a mega video. I have a compilation of the best DIYs and thrift flips of 2023. Disclaimer, the volume may be up and down. Just be mindful and adjust that as the video projects change. Now with that being said, let's get on into this video. First project is this wood shallow. I've painted the back of it black with the same color of black chalk paint, and now we're going to go ahead and use that sandy blonde as well to paint the inside of this. Well, I'm finishing the edge of this in the black, and then we're going to paint the inside of the bowl the sandy blonde. This will be for decor purposes only, but the wood was really beat up, and that's why I chose to paint it. Otherwise, I love natural wood, and I wanted to leave the inside of the bowl wood, but it was just really beat up, so I thought we would go ahead and use it for an art piece. Once we finish this with 2 coats of the sandy blonde, we are going to go ahead and use one of the butterfly pieces from transfers. This is from, I think, the Brocante transfer. It's one of the IOD transfers. I wanted this to be more of a neutral color, so I went ahead and used a neutral butterfly, which I think really complemented the whole piece. We're going to go ahead and sand those edges. If you ever paint something and it's just not perfect, you can always sand to blend those 2 colors of paint in, and that's what I'm going to do here. Plus give it a little bit of a distressed look, along with sealing this in again with that polyacrylic. Now y'all have to let me know what you think about this one. I love how that polyacrylic brought this those paint colors to life. Let me know in the comments below so far which one is your favorite. This next project is one of those Christmas wall pockets. I've already started painting the edge of this and the handle black. I am using coal black infusion, so I don't want to have to seal it, and I'm not going to distress this back. So I'm going to use some white to cover up the holly berries. I'm going to be using casement infusion to do that, and I do go ahead, I think I put 2 coats just back to back. I go ahead and do one and then go back in and do the other, and that way it does cover them pretty much so that you won't be able to see them through the paper. Starting off with the botanical journal blocks, I pulled the rose out of there because I just loved how beautiful it is with all the greens. So what I'm doing is I'm just tearing off some of the edges so it's not so harsh, so it'll blend in a little bit when I use some other mediums around it to make it kind of blend in with this. Now to attach this to this wall pocket, I'm using the Paint Couture Decoupage Medium, and I'm just going to start at the top and work my way down and use a little piece of plastic I had laying around. It's like kind of like saran wrap. I think the saran wrap method is awesome, so I'm just going to use that to smooth it on down. What I'm going to do to make this blend better, or to make this piece blend in better, I'm trying to mix up some paints that I think will be similar to the color of the decoupage paper. This is a couple different colors of the fusion paints in, I think it's Belmont and French Eggshell. So I'm just kind of adding this as I mix it and tap it onto that near the paper to see kind of how it looks. Once I got it to the color I like, I just went ahead and put it down both sides. Now I'm just sanding those edges off because I waited to paint the sides after the decoupage paper dried thoroughly, and now I'm just kind of blending in with that decoupage paper. Don't be scared to add paint on top of your paper to blend this in, because it usually turns out very, very beautiful. Once this dries, we are going to be using one of the IOD texture type stamps on here. We're going to be using this, it's like a crackle stamp, the larger crackle, and some olive green stays on ink. I love this olive green color. It's so beautiful, and it just really ties in those leaves there with this color. And then we are going to finish this off with some scripting. I have several stamps. Some of them I've removed from blocks that are smaller scripting. I have the Kindest Regards IOD stamp, but I really wanted to use a smaller font, so I pulled out one of my I think, like I said, it's been removed from a block, this script, and I'm going to use it on here to finish this piece off with the same color of the, no, I am using StazOn in black. That's right, because I wanted to tie in the black on the handle and on the edge of this piece. So let me know what y'all think about this one. Our next project is this. Next piece is a vintage tray, wood tray. Again, this was in rough shape. I went ahead and painted it that folk art black. This has a glass piece in the bottom of it. I took that out and I just put the wood tray part back in the bottom of this. I decided not to use the glass. I was thinking about it, I think, at this time, but then I decided not to use the glass at all. What I decided to do was use a Roycycle paper on this. So I'm going to go ahead and paint that wood. This, I think it's Cottage White by Folk Art. It's one of their white chalk paints. And once I let that dry, then we're going to put one of Royce's Roycycle papers on this. This is a caution one. I just love this. I thought it would look super awesome with this black tray. It's a cool industrial type look. So we're just going to go ahead and decoupage that on here. To decoupage this, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Decoupage Medium. This stuff is great. It goes a long way. I've done a lot of projects. You can see this is the same one I've been using, and it has not even gone a quarter of the way down in the jar. Now, along with this, I'm going to be using my Tim Holtz sprayer and some saran wrap. I really think the saran wrap does a great job of getting those little tiny wrinkles that show up out. I'm not too crazy about the wrinkles. They don't bug me that much. So as long as it's not like a huge wrinkle, I don't mind them. I think it just adds to the kind of look I'm going for. And I'm going to go ahead and finish this decoupage off with adding a coat or two of this on the very top of this paper. While we're letting that part dry, we're going to go ahead and use some sandpaper and a baby wipe and kind of distress the edges of this to give it a little bit more of a distressed look in the process. We're also going to use the polyacrylic on this to give it a finished look. I really love how this polyacrylic just brings that black color to a beautiful, deep, rich color. On to the next project. You all, I love the black on this clock, but I went outside of the box. Red is not really a color that I use often. So red is something I use at Christmas, maybe the 4th of July. I go ahead and add some texture to this, give it a good coat of that here and there, and then let that dry. And then off camera, I added just a coat of white chalk paint. Now we're starting with the red. And this is the DIY Carnival Red. I had a jar that I've had for a while, and it's very thick. If you can see over there in the corner, the clay has really clumped up. But like I said, I don't use red that often, and you can add water back to the DIY paint and let it sit, and it will soften back up. So I went ahead and added a good coat of this red, and I'm just going to sand this back through to the white and some of the black. It really turns out looking so cool because now we have white and black underneath there. I don't worry about taping off my clock face. I'm just going to use a razor blade and scrape that right off. But I'm going to sand this. I'm going to highly distress this piece between wiping back with a damp rag and this sander. We're going to finish this off with some of this Fusion Tough Coat Matte Finish. start with is this wood hanging wall shelf, I'm calling it. I'm not sure. I know it's vintage. It reminds me of like the 80s. So I'm going to be using this tea light candle wax to put some areas that I don't want the paint to stick to. I'm going to be using some DIY black velvet paint. I'm using a water mister while I'm putting this on because I want this coat to kind of be sheer at first. It does end up covering more of the wood than I originally imagined. I'm going to go ahead and add a matte top coat from Fusion onto this to seal my piece before I move on to the next step. Once I had my paint on, I kind of looked at this and decided that I really wanted it to look a lot more aged than what it was because it was pretty crisp and had no dents or dings in it. So I just took my hammer and really just hit it and scraped on it with my hammer on the edges to give it that more of an aged look that I wanted. I used my little finger sander as well to get some of those edges and take some of that paint off. And I found a little metal piece in my stash that I used to kind of dig down into the wood with. Now don't forget, you can slow down my videos in the bottom right hand corner under the settings. You just slow the speed down to what you want. I did go ahead and use some water and some sanding paper to sand back down to some of that natural wood. I did get a little heavy-handed, so now I'm just going back in, lightly rubbing over those places, not to cover too much because honestly, then you're right back to square one, which is fine. I love to experiment. You all will see a lot of times in my videos that I do the same processes over several times to get the look that I want. Some people don't enjoy that. It does not bother me. It's part of the process, and it really just makes me so happy to do the different processes and the different experiments. Right here, I am just adding a few like thicker pieces of the black paint to kind of mimic like there were spots that didn't get spread evenly and just to give it that imperfect look. I decided I wanted to add some crackle to this. So what I'm doing is getting my Mod Podge out and I'm going to just randomly put it on a few places and put some of the same black paint right back over it. I know generally people use it to show a different paint underneath, but I just want some crackling, not a two-tone color of paint. Now that our crackle has dried, I'm going to go back over that with some sandpaper and to rub some of that back and make that also look a little imperfect to go along with the rest of the piece. Along with the sandpaper, I'm going to be using this little blade here to scrape back some of that paint. I'm going to go ahead and seal it one more time with some of the DIY Dark and Decrepit. I love the aged brown look this gives, especially to black. So we're just going to go ahead and put a light coat over it. I want to add this really old door plate. I originally thought about using tacks or nails, but then I decided that I would use screws. When I first put these screws in, I did not tighten them up all the way, just in case I needed to adjust my plate a little bit. I got them mostly all the way, and then I finished tightening them up at the end. I'm going to use this JB Weld to hold my pieces together. This is a brass candlestick to my right, and look at the patina on that. If we could only put that in a bottle and then use it. And then this other piece, it set better and looked better upside down. So I really thought that I would be able to merge these two pieces together with these glass green dishes. You can see I'm showing you how the difference of that bottom looks tiny compared to the top. So as I was playing with these, I was trying to see if they came apart, and they did, because I put the green dishes on top of the pieces and they didn't sit flat. They also looked really weird, especially on the brass piece. The bottom is not quite flat, but it just didn't look right. You can see here, that one would have been okay. It was the brass one that didn't look great to me. So when I looked at that brass piece, I thought, well, maybe it comes apart too. And it did. And then, see how that looked? I just didn't like it. It just looked weird. So I thought, okay, I'm going to take this part off. And then I had those extra pieces left. And I thought, well, I don't really love how there's not a base on the cast iron one there. I didn't like that it was just going to be glued to this little tiny stick. So I thought, well, maybe I can kind of make these marry in together. This screw was not big enough, but I knew with the JB Weld, it wouldn't matter, that it would hold. So that's what I did. I used that, and I found myself a base for this piece. Now, after I took the two pieces from the brass candlestick holder, I knew I had my base for the brass candlestick holder left from the two pieces. I knew that that would work, so I just had to get a screw that would fit down in there and hold that. So they both had a platform for the green dishes to adhere to. Now, don't forget to let me know which is your favorite, and let me know what you think about these two altered candlesticks. This next project is a huge piece. I'm showing you, it is a box. I purchased this at a Goodwill. Our next piece is going to be this wall basket, and I'm going to go ahead and dry brush a coat, not quite full coverage, but almost full coverage of the Prairie Gray, and use this DIY Dark and Decrepit. We're going to do the same. We're going to brush over this, not quite a full coverage coat, but it really changes up this Prairie Gray. You still get the Prairie Gray showing through, and that is just, I don't know, the effect that it gives is just so cool. What I want to do is make a small sign for the front of this. I thought about using fabric. I know a lot of people use that, and I have used it before myself, but I'm just using these really thin pieces of wood from the Crafter Square. You get so many in a box or in a bag, and I'm just using my X-Acto knife to cut the blade, and it's not straight. That's fine. We're just going to go ahead and sand that to make it look straight once we get it cut. Now that we've got this cut, it just broke off very easy, and I'm going to use some scissors actually to trim the very end to get some of those extra pieces, and then start sanding to make it more even. I go ahead and use my little zip sander to sand all the edges and around the corners just a tad, and to bevel the top of the piece of wood so that it looks like it's finished instead of just a square piece of wood. It's very kind of flatter at the edges towards the corners, that kind of round. We are going to paint this little sign with Vintage Linen DIY paint. Give it a couple coats, or I think actually it took only one big coat or one thick coat to kind of blend in with the whole color scheme of the basket. I felt like this Vintage Linen was the great color for that. I think that this is Vintage Linen. If it's not, then it is beadboard. I go ahead and give this a coat of liquid patina to seal this in, because I'm going to be stamping on this, and I have found that stamping straight on chalk paint is not bad, but if you want it to be a little bit crisper and not reactivate that chalk paint or blend in too much on that dry chalk paint, the liquid patina will give it a good seal to stamp onto. I'm going to take my Crocodile, which it punches through holes through all kinds of different materials, and it punches straight through this wood. I'm going to use that to put some grommets in to hold my sign on. Now, you don't have to do this. You can use a nail and a hammer and just nail through and then pull back out to make your holes. There's lots of different ways, a little hand drill, different things, but I just have this tool and I use it for lots of things. And we're going to use some grommets, so I'm going to show you that too. So I decided that my sign looked a little too fresh, so I'm going to take some of that dark and decrepit and go around the edges of this and make it look a little aged, and I think I also brush a little bit across the front of it as well. I'm going to be using some silver grommets that have a long stem on the back of them, or base, so that it will go through the wood and come out the other side. And that is how, once you put pressure from this little tool, it smashes the back of that, almost makes it look like a flower. It just spreads it out, and that's what holds this grommet in place. Okay, so before we put our sign on, I'm going to go ahead and white wax this basket. I know that I did the dark and decrepit, but that was to give it a little bit of a deeper tone. And now we're going to give it a white tone. And once we wipe this back, the white in the cracks, it just comes together so beautifully. Now we are moving to the stamping part for our little sign that's going on the front of this. I thought this would make an adorable mail holder because it's quite large, and I don't know about you all, but I let my mail stack up before I do anything about it. So I made sure that someone could hang this right on the wall when they walk in and toss their mail in it. So we're just going to use the lowercase of this typesetting stamp by IOD and stamp right on that. We're going to be using the IOD ink in Stone Gray, and I like to put it out on a piece of paper and roll it, and then roll it on my stamp. You can do this different ways, but this is just the way that I like to. With this particular stamp, I'm going to go ahead and stamp this off on some white paper just to give me an idea of what it's going to look like with this gray color compared to my piece. You don't have to do this. I just like to do a sample run before I do the real thing. After I did this, I decided that I wanted the letters a little closer together to give more space, or more negative space, on my sign. After, like I said, you can see there, it looked good on the paper, but I decided for the plaque it needed to be closer together to give more negative space. So that is a good reason to pre-stamp on something that is not your final project. Now that this is dry, we'll go ahead and add another coat just to seal in that ink. I don't think this is necessary, but I am going to put it on there anyways just to give it a longer life. Now, staying with the whole white wax theme, I'm going to go ahead and white wax this sign and wipe that back as well. To attach this sign, I am going to use my X-Acto knife, and I'm just going to kind of bore out some holes, and I'm going to bore out 2 holes per hole, because what I'm going to do is use some twine to feed through from the back like a U shape. In other words, I'm going to feed one end of the twine through the top hole and the second end of the twine through the bottom hole, tie those together, or just put them together and feed them through the single grommet hole. I hope that makes sense. Now, once we pull that through the grommet hole, I'm going to tie several knots, and that is what's going to hold the sign on. There are many different ways you can attach this sign. I also add some glue, some quick and thick glue, type bond, behind the sign to help with a more permanent hold. So if it does get pulled on, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to pull the knots that I made in front of each grommet off. Once I make several knots on the front of this, I thought about leaving a couple little edges of the twine, but I went ahead and cut it all the way down to the knot. So it just looks like it's the end of something versus just a knot tied with strings hanging off of it. Also, I end up taking some glue and putting on the knots, and then I turn around and take some of that same prairie gray, I think, or it may have been the old school, to make the knots almost look like metal. You'll see. After I put the holes through the back, well, through the front and into the back of this basket, it did leave little cracks in the basket where the twine comes through. Now, it is inside the basket. You don't have to do this, but what I decided to do was to get some of this gray felt and put some Titebond and hot glue on it and put on the back of each side where I bored those little holes and put that twine, so it would just give it more of a finished look. But you do not have to do this. Some people do, that does not bother them. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to use my pliers, and I'm going to pull as tight as I can on these knots with that plier before I add this glue to it. I don't think I show where I put the gray paint on those little knots, but you will see it in the photos at the end of this video, so stay tuned for those. What I'm doing here is taking a baby wipe and going back and wiping back some of that wax to bring some of the original color of the basket as well as the other layers back through, and I love how this turned out. You all let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this one? This next project is an upcycle. I had these in one of my booths and they didn't sell. They're boho 70s. I'm going to be painting just the center of these with some black chalk paint. I loved these. I really thought they would sell quickly, but they didn't. So we're going to change them up, and when I get these done and I put them in my booth, they sell very quickly. So I'm just leaving, like I said, the rattan color on the outer edge, which it is a plastic. I'm leaving that natural. I'm going to paint the center black chalk paint. And I'm going to be using some of these IOD transfers in these mushrooms. I'm going to take the mushrooms and I'm transferring it right down the center of these on the black. And then I'm going to seal that in with a clear coat. And these two are done. And I think I sold these for $14.95 a piece in my booth. And I gave $2 a piece for them. It was a really easy upcycle, and someone else got to love these and they didn't go to the dump or the trash. So this first project is a really easy one. We're going to be working on this beautiful ornate frame. It's a gold in color. It's very heavy. It feels like resin, but it's really heavy, so not sure. So someone had tried to fix this, and I'm going to undo their work and fix it myself. What I'm doing here now is I'm using my heat gun to reheat the glue that's on here. It looks like it is hot glue and possibly some other kind of glue. So if you use your heat gun, you can get this glue to start melting again. And then I'm going to take a very large scraper and use that to scrape what I can off the hot glue. And there's also some kind of older dried yellow glue under here as well. I wanted to leave this in here to show you, if you don't already know, that there are ways to fix things that maybe need to be fixed for an upcycle. Now this glass for the frame is glued in, so I'm having to be very careful around this. Even though it looks like I'm just really jabbing like crazy, it is sped up, but I'm being very careful not to break my glass because it's glued in, and there is, you know, I don't want to worry about trying to take that out and put it back in to keep it in place, because I feel like it was probably glued in from the factory. I'm not sure. So this actually turns out really pretty. Once I get the glue off of here, we are going to do some sanding to get it very smooth, or as smooth as possible. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint the back of this with some coal black infusion. I'm showing you here, there is some issues with this cardboard backing. It does have some dry glue on it, which does not seem like hot glue. It's more of a chippy glue. So I am just going to sand that off and try to repair this. The reason that I'm taking time with this is because not only was this a very costly frame, but as you can see, we're going to be putting Mona Lisa in this, and boy doesn't she deserve a beautiful frame. I'm going to keep this in my office for a while and then eventually put this in my booth. I think I paid $3.99 for this frame, which was well worth it. I don't really like paying more than $1, but you know, this one was probably a high cost frame and it's definitely Mona Lisa worth. So what I'm going to do now is there was some very weird orangey red on this frame that I didn't care for. So I'm just going to take, I think, the Grecian Rub and Buff and touch over those places that was kind of red. This first piece is a part that came off of a desk. It's just some pressed wood and it has this laminate faux wood look on it. I am filling some holes right now with some spackling, and then I saw that one of the holes had a little wood dowel in it, a connector, so I had some of those and I went and grabbed a few to fill the other holes with, and I ended up using a hammer to kind of hit those in and then fill around with some more of that spackling. So I'm going to be using Apothecary here. I wanted to add a little bit of color to our life. Everything's going to have 2 coats. I put 1 coat on, I let it dry, then I put a 2nd coat on and I let that dry. I'm sealing everything up with liquid patina. You can use Mod Podge, you can use polyacrylic, whatever you have. Alright, so after we let this dry, we're going to use some IOD stamps. The first stamp I'm using is the IOD Birds and Branches stamp. This stamp has a painterly effect, like it has been painted with a brush, which gives it beautiful detail in a painterly way. I am using the IOD Stone Gray ink, and I'm using a roller. I like to use a roller and just kind of get it evenly coated on the stamp a couple times so that I can just pick the stamp up and then put it on the paint. I do use sometimes just dipping my stamps in the paint or in ink, but this time I am using a brayer roller, and you can get those from many different places. This happens to be a Tim Holtz one. So I'm just playing around with this stamp, laying down some of the branches and then adding the birds. I only add a couple birds where I really want them to see how it looks, and then I'm going to add in some leaves here and there to make the whole thing kind of cohesive. Now always remember when you are laying your stamp down is to, once you put it down, hold it there in place, keep one hand on it at all times, and then use the other hand to kind of go around it. You can use a thin mount, which is kind of like a acrylic block, but it's flexible. I just use the stamp itself. It's either way. Sometimes I will use the thin mounts as well. I knew I wanted this larger bird that was flying to look like it was swooping in, and that there already be another bird sitting on the branch waiting for this other one to come in. And then I just went ahead and added the leaves kind of around the birds to make it look like a whole scene. And that is sort of what these are about, all of these wood blocks. They're just art scenes to sit around, be shelf sitters, some little pieces of artwork out of scrap wood. Now let me know in the comments below which one is your favorite, and is this a good way to use up scraps? I took the roller here and I am just rolling ink all over the edges of this, and then I do it on the sides just to give it that kind of rustic. I didn't want to sand back through this because of the color underneath. It wasn't dark enough, so this was my way of kind of distressing it. So now I'm just using some IOD wax in white and in dark. I am putting this all around. I'm putting the dark wax on first because I want it to have a little aged look before I add the white wax to it. So I didn't cover the whole piece. I just covered some areas because as I wipe, it's going to get across all of the areas. Next, we're going to add our white wax, and we're going to let that set up, and then we're going to add some liquid patina to finish this piece off. So I saw these really cool candle holders at Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to put a picture in right here so you can see what we're going to be doing. This was my inspiration piece. I dug through my junk to see what I had that might fall in the lines to look similar. And I found like these 2 wood pieces and this little silver bowl. I'm going to get these 2 pieces glued together, short-term hot glue with the long-term wood-to-wood glue. And we're going to do the same with the silver bowl. I'm also going to use a nail in the center of the wood round on the bottom to, well, it's more like a coaster, I think, to attach it to the wood candle holder. You can also use a screw if you want to. That would help as well. Now I'm using this lid that came off of a Dollar Tree jar because I don't really like the bottom of my pieces to have a hollow area if I can help it. We're doing the same process with the glues to have this a long-term hold and to give this a base. So here we have, and I'm showing you the comparison. For the base of this, we're going to be using some DIY Little Black Dress paint to mimic the inspirational piece on the wood. Once I get this painted, or I think I stopped in the middle of painting this, I decided to fill, there's a little crease in between the 2 wood pieces, and I decided to fill that with some, it's like spackling or compound that you put on the wall to fill nail holes. So I'm going to do that before I finish painting this. Now that we have that painted bottom, we're going to work on the top silver piece of this. I'm going to use some wax to mimic the color on the inspirational piece. It had some different colors of silver and possibly whites and blacks, and I'm going to show you that inspirational piece again to show you why I'm doing this part. I'm using the Finnabair Old Silver wax and black soot at some point to get the look similar. I did start out with my finger, and then I moved on to saran wrap. Oh, I show you up close there as well. The saran wrap will will keep my fingerprints off of it for one, and the wax will not soak into a cloth and waste the wax. It will not, where the saran wrap is not porous, plus it'll kind of give us that crinkly look. Now I'm just using some of this clear wax. Next, we are going to white wax this to get that same look in our inspiration piece. And I add a lot of white wax to this. I added the clear wax so that I was going to be able to rub some of this white wax back off, because the main area that I want it to be in is going to be those crevices. Alright, we are going to have a little bit of fun with this next piece. I want to show you guys some techniques that you may not already know. This frame is so gorgeous. Now it looks like someone had did their own little artwork here with some faux leaves glued onto the backing of the frame. Went ahead and picked this out of my junk pile to put a bird in it. Alright, so I got this out of a bird book, and what I did with this frame was I painted it the coal black infusion. Found this bird and it was sitting on this branch. I'm just going to cut this out. I've placed it where I wanted it to fit in my frame, how I wanted the branch to fall. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out, but you'll see the white background is not working for me. So we're going to change that. So I've always loved paper crafting. I am a huge Tim Holtz fan. I've learned many techniques over the years, and I want to share some with you. A lot of you all already may be paper crafters and love mixed media and Tim Holtz fans yourself, but I'm going to go ahead and show maybe some people that aren't. I've pulled out my distressed inks. I've got my Mona Lisa and her beautiful dreamy background there to kind of go by. I'm not going to make it just like that because obviously I want it to be different, but also kind of go in the same color family. So what I'm doing is the pieces that we cut off of that page are going to be my practice sheets to see what colors I want to use, and then I pulled out the distress in the regular inks, and then I pulled out the oxides. The oxides are more of a creamy, consistent, they are more of an opaque versus a clear, so I'm going to try those first, and then we'll try the regular inks on another piece to see which one I go with. Basically, what I'm doing is taking a sponge dauber, dabbing it into the different inks, which technically you should use a new dauber for each ink, but that's a whole other story. I am using this dauber to blend the inks together to see what colors it is that I want to use to add to this bird. So I've done my oxide sample, and now I'm going to work on just the regular distress inks that are not the oxide based. And then I'm going to choose which one I think that I would like the best to go with the bird. I do speed up my videos quite a bit. Don't forget you can change the settings to slow them down in the bottom right hand corner on YouTube. Also, if you like this kind of video, which adds paper crafting as well as more mixed media, learning how to do techniques, go ahead and comment below and let me know if that's something you're more interested in. I love paper crafting. I just feel like that home decor is more of a prosperous YouTube channel for me, but I would love to combine the two and would love your vote on that. So comment below and let me know. I have decided that I'm going to go ahead and go with the oxides to make my colors, and now I've got my bird there, and we're going to get started on that. We're going to do the same thing, except for we're going to go all around the bird with these inks. If you get some of this on the bird, on top of the bird, it's okay. It will just make him look or her look a little cloudy, but you can take a baby wipe and wipe it back off until these completely dry and set. They are wipeable. Also, one thing to know about the distress inks, they are still water soluble even after they dry. So keep that in mind when you're using these types of inks for anything that could be that you may want to be permanent. This is going to be behind glass, so it doesn't matter to me. It's not going to get reactivated with water. I feel like I have the white area around the bird toned down enough to fit in with the look that I'm going, so I'm going to go ahead and trim that down and get it placed inside of this gorgeous frame. I'm going to add some of that rub and buff to all of the edges of this and the metal piece on the top to give it a little bit of gold. You'll have to let me know which one is your favorite so far. This next project is a junk trash to treasure. It is this little bird and this little glass bowl. I think these came in a set of 4 from Dollar Tree, and I think I used it for something else, but I'm going to turn this into a little statue. I thought I had the photo saved because this bird statue turns out almost identical to the one that is my inspiration piece. I start out by gluing the 3 pieces together with some E6000 and hot glue as a temporary hold. I end up using JB Weld on the bird base in between it and the lamp piece, which holds immensely. This thing is not coming apart. It is just awesome. That JB Weld clear 5-minute setup glue is amazing. All right, so we're going to use a mixture of our salt wash and the sandy blonde paint, DIY paint together. And then we're going to cover the base with just some white chalk paint and the weathered wood of DIY paint. Once we get those coats on, I'm going to go ahead and give this a coat of the polyacrylic to seal in those paints so that we can add some white wax and distress this little bird back. I love how this ends up blending together so well. It just really looks adorable. And you can put a little tiny plant coming out of the top of it. I used a faux plant for the vignette photos. But this thing, you all, it is so cute. For the white part on the bottom, we're going to go ahead and add some of the DIY dark wax to grungy that up just a little bit to keep with the whole grungy theme. And then we're going to finish this off with a little bit of sanding to bring back some of those base colors. Let me know what you think about this bird statue in the comments below. This next project is a very heavy piece. I don't know what it's made out of, but we are going to make this over to go with our Dark and Moody. When I started doing this project, I kind of painted everything a blank canvas, and I start out with a gray tone here. This, I think, is the DIY Gravel Road. I'm going to give this a good coat, and then we are going to move on to that dark, moody style with this piece. This one's pretty simple. Right, now that we've got that covered, we're going to go in with a good coat of the DIY Little Black Dress, and we are going to seal this up with some of the polyacrylic that I've been using. The reason why that I also did that coat was because when I do sand back through this or distress, I don't want that yellow coming through. I would rather it be a very light gray, or even a white would have been fine to go with this theme. I let that dry, and now I'm going in with my DIY white wax. And again, I sealed that because I want to be able to wipe this white wax back. Man, that was so difficult to say. So we're going to do that really heavily, and now we're going to start rubbing some of that back to bring that little black dress back through. As I was looking at this piece, I realized there were some very small crevices that I did not get in with my white wax, so I'm just taking a very tiny brush and putting that white wax down in those crevices. Now that we have our white wax on there, and I feel like it is where I want it to be, I'm going to go ahead and go in and start distressing. I'm wet distressing right now. As you can see, that DIY paint does distress back very beautifully with just a damp rag, and then I want to do a little bit of scratching with the sandpaper, so that's why I'm using my sandpaper now. You can get two different distress looks with the wiping back with the rag and then with the sandpaper itself. I am just doing some final touches here with the sandpaper and the wet distressing on the edges. And this piece is finished. What do you all think about this one? This one was pretty simple. The first project is this plate-like wall hanging art that I'm painting over. It is a two-piece, and we're painting this with DIY black velvet, beautiful muted black color. We're giving it 2 coats, and then we're going to do something super special with this. I can't wait for y'all to see these. I'm going to show you my inspiration piece off of Pinterest right here. Now these are real specimens, and that's kind of what we're going for. We're going for a faux specimen look. We're going to be using the IOD transfers in Entomology and Mio's pages. I'm also using the little tiny pink molds you'll see here. I think I ordered these from Amazon or maybe AliExpress. I'm really not sure, but they're really tiny and they're going to fit perfect on these edges. I went ahead and made my molds in advance. I'm going to be gluing these. What I'm doing is, again, mimicking these little trims from the original inspiration that I'll pop in here. Look at the trims on this one. Aren't those gorgeous? Once I get these glued on and dried overnight, I will be using a gold paint marker to highlight these. I do first put a coat of the black velvet over them to make them blend in with the black paint, and then go back with the gold. Now that we have that on, we're going to use our DIY Dark and Decrepit to seal this in and to tone down that gold. These transfers are really easy to put on. You just take your little plastic tool that comes with them and rub until they come off the paper. Lift the paper while you're rubbing. Now I'm just putting the second one kind of in the center, lining up my two wall pieces to make sure that I get that second butterfly where I want it. I've already sealed these once, but since I put a transfer on, I'm going to go ahead and put a light coat of clear polyacrylic all over the piece just to make them blend in. This next piece is just a salvage box. I've been picking up boxes along the way because I love adding metals and hardware to them. I have painted this the DIY black velvet, and now I'm going to go ahead and seal that because we're going to do the drippy, messy experiment that I love to do, and I want to seal in this black paint so I don't lose too much of it. I've had these gorgeous hardware in my stash, and this paint just ends up going so beautifully with it. So here you'll see I am using my brush to flatten this paint out and to spray the water on it to get it to do that drippy effect. I'm adding it where I want it to start at and where I want it to stop. I'm going to be using my mister to help facilitate that. I'm also going to be using my drying tool to dry the drips in places that I don't want them to leave or to drip too far. And then when I go back over it with a different color, it just gives this beautiful effect. Let me know what y'all think about this in the comment section below. We are going to be adding some of the DIY cherry pick to this to play off of that beautiful burgundy hardware that I'm going to be adding to this. We're going to do the same thing with this as we've done with this paint couture paint. We're just going to smear it on. We're going to spray it, get it dripping, and we're going to dry it some. Once I get this how I want it, I'm going to go ahead and stencil on here. Now, I have not sealed this yet. I did or not get on camera the footage of me taking my Rub and Buff antique gold. I took it around the corners of this whole piece. I'm now going to be using one of the Jamie Race Vintage stencils. I think it's the Apothecary set. I'm going to use my black velvet DIY paint to stencil this little sign on there. I'm not going to be using the dashes, just the text. I want these colors to pop, so I'm going to be using the polyacrylic gloss or satin, maybe it's gloss finish, that I've been using. I've just gotten used to saying polyacrylic clear coat. It's not a matte finish though, and it really brings out the drippy effect on here and that stencil. To tone that Rub and Buff back, the antique gold Rub and Buff back, we're going to go ahead and use some black wax on this to kind of tone the whole thing down and give it a little bit more aged look. Let me know what you all think of this one in the comment section below. Before we add this hardware, I'm going to black wax it to give it an aged look as well. Not that it's not already aged, but I just wanted a little bit of black wax. And then we're going to add some Rub and Buff. Now, don't end up using both of these pieces on this piece. I went into my stash of screws and found screws that was short enough to go through this box, but not too far to come out the back side of it. I'm just going to use my drill and put a couple short screws to hold this handle in. Now we're going to add some of that gold Rub and Buff to this, as well as some black wax to have those screws blend in with the rest of our box. Our next project or piece is a cool tin that's already got some aging, and I'm taking salt wash in it and I'm adding some texture to this to break up that factory pattern. Once I let this dry, I'm going to paint it a white color. Then I'm going to add the little black dress to this, just like we did the other piece. This one's going to turn out a little different though. It's going to have a little kick to it. Once I let that dry, I'm going to use this clear wax. I use the wax because I'm going to immediately go in and wet distress this a lot. So the wax just makes it a little easier to wet distress, plus gives it a barrier because I am going to white wax this as well, even though I'm distressing back to the white paint. You'll see, once this one is heavily distressed the way that I want it, I'm going to go ahead in with some white wax and wax this. And I decided to add a transfer. Yes, after I waxed it. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I did, and the transfer came off so easy onto it. I don't know what it is about uneven surfaces. These things just pop off like magic. We're going to use this little rose set, and this is from the IOD Ephemeral Melange. And I'm just going to press it down in all those little cracks, and I'm going to take my little bone folder. And once it comes off, it just looks so cool because it cracks down in those little cracks, and it makes itself aged right away. This next piece, I don't do a whole lot to it. I love the shape of this shelf. It's very distressed. The paint is sheer. It could have probably used a second coat, whoever painted it. I did not paint it. I'm leaving it the original paint. I'm going to distress this back with some sandpaper, and we're going to add this door knob plate to this one as well. Once I sanded this and got this the way that I wanted, I went ahead and put a coat of clear coat over it, just because the places where I sanded were a little dry and I wanted them to darken those up a little bit. So I used that Fusion top coat on there. And then we're going to take this back plate for a doorknob, vintage, and we're going to add some of this black velvet paint to it. Now I want to go ahead and add almost a full coverage, and then I'm going to wipe back or wet distress some of the copper back through this plate. Once I get the piece the way that I want it, after I do that wet distressing, I'm going to use that same matte tough top coat from Fusion to seal that piece. Once we seal it and that dries, we will go ahead and add some of that black wax to this. Well, we're going to go ahead and center that and use it as a focal point on this shelf. I'm going to go ahead and use the screws and use the same method as I did in the last shelf that we did, using that faucet knob for the centerpiece. So if someone wants to hang something, they can. For this next project, we're going to be making over these two busts. I do like the pattern that's on these, but I do want to give them more of a sort of industrial look. We're going to be adding some black chalk paint, giving these a good coat. Next, I'm mixing some cream and a more of a parchment color paper together to get a lighter beige. And I'm going to be using parts of this French stencil to give some text to these busts. I grabbed a couple of my large number stencils and stenciled a 1 and a 2 on these. I just went back in under those numbers and put some more text to kind of finish the whole look of this off. We're going to use that same paint mixture to paint the tops and the bottom of these. Then we're going to sand them a little bit and go back in and do some dark waxing. As I sand this, I am doing some wet distressing as well. And if I get too much off, I do add a little bit of paint back until I get it the way that I like. I wanted some of that wood to show back through and for these to look aged and distressed. I love how this dark wax gives this such a antique look and tones that black back. It just really makes a big difference when you put brown wax over black. Once you start doing that, you will really enjoy it, and it'll be hard not to wax black with brown. What we're going to do next is we're going to start working on some crowns for these. Now I'm using some Dollar Tree. I'm just showing you here the difference between the dark wax and the not waxed. But we're going to use some Dollar Tree metal trim for this. This comes in rolls for $1, and I decided to use the one that looks more like a crown shape. We're going to be putting 2 of those pieces, offsetting them to make the crown look fuller. I'm going to be using a paint bottle to shape the size of the crown that I want, and I'm going to cut the metal apart where I want it. And then I'm going to be using some wire to wire these together. And they're just going to be an open crown that's going to lay on the very top of these little busts. once I get my crown the way that I want it, I am going to be adding some paint to these to get the color that I want. I'm going to be using burnt umber in apple barrel and some of that lighter color that we used earlier, as well as some gold and silver. I'm going to be layering the burnt umber on first to get my base color, and then I'm going to be adding the other colors to it to give it more of an aged look. Now that I've got my crowns the way that I want them, I'm going to go ahead and make some beads or necklaces to hang off of these just to kind of go with this. I'm just adding to some pre-existing old jewelry that I have and just making this the way that I want it to kind of go with the whole industrial metal type style. Once I finish the necklace parts of these, I am going to work on these crowns. Now we did put some different colors of paint, but I decided to go in and change one of them from a gold to a silver just so the crowns are different. And one of the necklaces kind of has more silver and one has gold. So I used some of this Finnabair silver wax to do that with, and some of this black soot. And that will finish these up. You all will have to let me know what you think about these in the comments below. I really loved making these over, and I'd put them in my office to kind of go with my style. We're going to be working on these two decoupage ladies, and this is from another video that I did and dropped into this compilation, and I told a story about both of these women in that video, so I am going to just go ahead and keep that story in here. If you don't want to hear it, you can mute this while you just watch the process, but right now I'm just adding this decoupage paper with some decoupage medium to this broken TV tray. Right now you can see I did have a tear there. We're going to fix that. You all do not worry about imperfections when you do decoupage with napkins, papers. Do not worry. I'm going to show you how we fix those. So anyways, this lady we don't know who she is, okay? She could have been a beggar off the street. I highly doubt it. She's too beautiful for that. She looks like a vixen or a goddess. But this is a painting by Sir James Jabusa Shannon. He lived from 1862 to 1923, and he painted this originally on oil canvas. The last information I could find about the original oil painting, it was sold at Christie's for around $33,000, and that was 20 years ago. So I can't imagine what it's worth now. I'm sure it's in some private collector's home. So that's all we know about this red-headed vixen holding this beautiful silver ship. But I thought that her and the next vixen, which is going to be a notorious vixen, going to be coming up, I thought they went very well together because she's holding this ship and the next vixen wore a ship on her head. All right, so let's get back into this DIY. Once we get her down, and like I said, there is going to be a few little places that I'm going to have to fix. We're putting her on this white background with this light colored wood, so she does not blend in at all. What we have to think about is, how are we going to make her blend in? And what I'm going to be using is, I'm going to be using Fusion's new color of cast iron. I love this color, you all. It is not a gray, but it's not a black. It's more on the warm side. I really was hoping it would be even warmer, like a black brown, but the color works perfect with this, and we're going to add some salt wash to that. That's how we're going to get her blended in. So I'm just going to start out without putting any salt wash in it and putting a small thin coat just all the way around this, and then I decide I'm going to go ahead and add that salt wash in. Now with salt wash, you can follow the directions on the bottle or the tub that it comes in, but I really mixed mine very, very thick. In other words, it was almost crumbling, but it still had a good liquid base to make it stick. When adding the salt wash on, I realized I didn't have the camera turned on, so you'll see I have some already on there. Now the way that I added this was just using a short-handled brush, paintbrush, and I'm just stippling it on. In other words, dipping my brush in that mixture and then pouncing it on. Now I did cover up that tear with some salt wash, but I also go around to different areas of the portrait and add some more of the salt wash mixture, so it's not like there's just a random piece or place covering that tear that I had, but also that it's on the portrait itself, so it's meant to be like it's mixed in on her. And I do that even if I don't tear, because the salt wash, I don't want it just all around the edges to cover those edges up. And you can also tear these decoupage papers, but I didn't do that. So really, it really is just whatever look you're going for. The next step we're going to do is we're going to be adding some of these Finnabair Art Alchemy waxes. I've used these quite often in my videos. You can find these on Amazon. I've had these forever. They last for years. I just make sure if mine's trying to seem like it's drying up that I'll go ahead and put some saran wrap over the top and then screw the lid on. It does help the moisture stay in them. They do come in tubes now, so I'm just going around adding this antiquing wax to give it a little bit of that copper out of her hair color look. But I do go back in later and add some more colors, including the fire, I think it's fire red of this, to pull out the color of her hair. To bring in some of this coppery look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of my paint, some of my acrylic paint that is metallic, and I have this sort of a brown color of metallic, and I go around and I stipple some of that on top of the salt wash mixture that I made. Once I get this finished, I'm going to go ahead and put a clear coat over all of this, and I'm going to add some metal, what's called metal book corners, just to give this more of a higher end look and more of a finished, like a wall art look. So I have these gold corners, and I'm painting them that same color that I added into the photo for that kind of coppery look. Once I let these dry, I will just add these with some hot glue to the corners. Now I don't show it here, but you will see it on the next piece of art that we upcycle. Okay, this next project is definitely a notorious woman, is what I'm calling her. We're going to be using these same techniques related to decoupaging her and putting salt wash around her with the same color of paint. Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette became the Queen of France at the age of 18. Now, she's notorious for many things. She's also well known and famous for many things. She was very fashion forward. She was known for her haute couture, a genuine love of fashion and art. She was loved, she was hated, she was beheaded. She was also known for her crazy wigs that she wore. She wore this one with a ship on top of it to celebrate the French naval success. She's also famous for the affair of the diamond necklace. You should read about that story. All I know is today, in this day and time, it was a necklace that was worth $100 million and took a long time to make. She didn't want to pay for it. She was thought of as the scapegoat for France's money problems. They did not want to blame their king, so she was the blame for her spending habits. Fast forward to the French Revolution, the palace was actually attacked and they did escape, I think, at some point. However, they ended up getting her, they beheaded her. Her children lived horrible lives after that. She had several children, or they had several children. Reading about what happened to them after their mother was beheaded was just very devastating. I've always been inspired by her. They had to pay for their parents' sins, art, and her love of fashion, regardless of the type of person she was. Although she was known to be very tender-hearted and giving, she did not say the famous "let them eat cake when people were hungry." You can read up about that too. I'm using some blues and that antique bronze again with, I think, some of the silver to bring out the blues in the piece of art. And I do use these waxes on the black part where I stippled that paint. You don't see it here, but I add those in over the whole piece of art like I did on the other one. I'm going to be using some silver corners and some dark silver paint to cover those before I glue them on. After I get the waxes on the whole piece of art around those edges, I go ahead and put a good sealer on this, and then this piece is finished. It's got a wall hanger on the back and turned into a piece of wall art. Let me know what you think about this one. Our next project, we're going to be using this metal house that I found at a thrift store, and one of these little cutting boards. I had a set of these that were highly damaged, and I'm just using them in projects. I'm going to add these little feet with some wood glue and some hot glue for longer hold, and then we're going to paint this more like a stain with some DIY in the color Weathered Wood. Because that black is so stark and has more of a spray painted look, I went ahead and brushed on some black paint to kind of rough that up and give it more of a handmade look to match the bottom piece that we're going to use for our base for this. We're putting that wash over this board of that weathered wood and just giving it a pretty good coat. I'm spraying water to help it to seep down in the wood and those crevices to give it that old weathered barn look. To make this look even more weathered, I'm going to go ahead and use some white wax on this. I'm using the DIY brand. There are other white waxes out there. Just use what you have in your stash. This helps give it an even more weathered look. We're going to get that dry and give it a clear coat and go back in and do some black wax on this to make it even more grungy. I add a little bit of that white wax to this house top to help tie it in with the base piece. Now that I have both pieces kind of how I want them, I am sealing this wax and that paint in on that top piece so that it doesn't come off and that it gives it more of a sealed look. I'm going to be using this French stencil to use parts of it on here and a part of another stencil to give this a little bit of a French country look. You all will have to let me know what you think about this one. Our next project is this shelf that came with these little rattan baskets. Now they needed some repairs, so I'm just using some of this wax thread to go through the holes that's on these. They're not going to be that noticeable because we're going to paint these baskets with a color similar to their natural color. This shelf is a dark hunter green with a natural wood top. It's pretty well used. It has quite a bit of just facial damage on it, not necessarily through the wood or anything. So we're going to go ahead and give it a good paint job with some black chalk paint and some Sandy Blonde DIY clay paint. Once I let that Sandy Blonde paint dry, I'm going to go ahead and use my IOD stencil. It's the Le Courrier. It's a French stencil. I use some of my black chalk paint with this so that I can get the more of a textured lettering on this. You can use ink or any kind of paint that you want. I just used some black chalk paint. Now, I've not used this stamp before, so I am giving it a little bit of a sand. That's what you're supposed to do before you use it for the first time. And then I'm just going to make that pattern go across the top of this so it'll cover the whole top piece. I will seal this in once I finish the complete piece of this. We're going to add some of the IOD transfers on here. I'm going to be using some of the entomology and some of the, I think it's ferns or flora and fauna. I'm not sure. But I'm just rubbing these on the edges and some of the butterflies on around the pegs of this shelf to give it more of a nature look. And then I add a butterfly or a moth on the very top of this. And like I said, I do seal the whole piece in once I get it completely finished. Originally, I'd started painting the inside of this a different color and I didn't like it. So I do finish the whole piece on the inside and the outside with that black chalk paint and then the Sandy Blonde on the top. I love how this piece turned out, and it has already sold. I put it in one of my booths and it sold not too long after I put it in there. This next piece is just a really easy one. We're going to take some of these postcards that I ordered, I think from Temu. They are like reprints, or I don't know. They're from vintage ones, I think. But I'm going to pick up this one with the mushrooms on it, and we're just going to put it in this frame. But the frame size was a little bit larger than the postcard. So what I did was got some black paper, or I think this is actually cardstock. I just sort of trimmed around the insert from the back, and now I'm just cutting it with my cutter. And I'm going to use the postcard on the front of this, and I'm going to use my hot glue gun to attach it so it doesn't move when I put it in the frame. So there's a little tip for that. You can use other things. I just happen to have my hot glue gun laying there. You can use double-sided tape. This next piece, or this next project, is a piece of scrap wood that was came from a pile of wood. We get wood from a furniture factory to burn wood, and I always pick through it and kind of get out things that I might want to upcycle. So I'm using these IOD stamps to make like a countryside. This is kind of like a French country look, and I'm just getting some from different ones. This one's called La Campagne, and making just this country scene. And then I'm going to seal it with some clear coat, and I think I do white wax this and put a hanger on the back of this. This is an easy, quick way to make a piece of hanging art. And I do go ahead and use my brayer and just the IOD ink to stamp this on with. I do use paint sometimes, and you saw that in a couple projects ago, but this one I'm just using ink. And I think this is the IOD stone color ink. It's not black, even though it looks pretty dark. I didn't want the harshness of the black for these projects because I wanted them to kind of look like French country. So the stone color seemed to work better for that. And I'm just taking a little set of branch stamps here to make some trees. These made perfect trees because they were branches, so they were kind of tiny, and the trees needed to look tiny in the background. You guys will have to let me know what you think of this one. To add to this, I go ahead and take that roller with what little bit of ink is left on it and just kind of roll around the edges to tie this in with the color on the front of this. This next piece, although I love this sort of steampunk, fleur-de-lis, rustic look here, I want to make this piece over. This one is going to be lots of layers. I'm going to start out with something I think I want. I'm going to end up with something totally different. It's a lot of experiment. You don't have to do all this, but I enjoyed doing this piece so much. So we're starting out with some DIY in the color Gravel Road. I am putting a couple layers of this on because I'm really not sure what I want to do yet. And I do this with several pieces. I just give them a good light coat of paint and then move forward from there. I have my Mr. bottle of water at the ready because that's what I'm going to be using in this piece. I make a mixture of Sandy Blonde DIY and some salt wash too. So we're going to put some of that on this piece. I'm going to be using a art knife to do this, and I'm just scraping it on in different areas. There's already some previous factory grunge crust on there, and it looks too perfect. So we're gonna kind of break that up with this salt wash mixture. I go ahead and add another coat of, I think that's beadboard. If not, it's crinoline, to cover everything up. I want some of that sandy blonde color when I sand to come back through, and I want some of the gray, but I also want a brighter white because I'm going to be adding some additional colors on top of it, and you'll see coming up. I have this piece tilted up, and this color that I'm getting ready to start is with Farm Fresh, and I think I also used some aviary. I go in a different direction with the red. You'll see that I do start out with this because I'm thinking I'm going to do different colors, and I do, but it's not, they're more neutral. The way that I'm doing this is I'm just spreading some of the paint and then using my mister so that it will drip down to give it a drippy color effect. This next color is Prairie Gray. You all, I love this color. Oh, it's like a light weathered wood. So I'm adding that and some Old School, which is like a charcoal gray. It's beautiful as well. Going back in with some of the Sandy Blonde, because once I sand that back through, I also want to have some of that color on the exterior. I'm just wiping back so that it doesn't get overly wet. I still want that water to give this drippy look, and it's also going to reactivate all those paints. It just helps when you get ready to sand some of this back or wipe some of it back to show the base layers. So basically, I use a lot of different DIY paints. You'll see them laying over there to the side in the lids, wiping them on with a brush and then using the sprayer to dilute them to give it more of a washed look. A lot of it does get wiped back, but that is kind of the point because I really want this to look very aged, like it's weathered. Some of it's faded, look like it's had maybe several coats of paint. I don't know. You'll kind of see it does take a little bit of a turn when we get closer to the end. So I'm just taking my dryer and kind of drying this a little bit because I want to dry it to see what the paint looks like dry, because these colors do dry a lighter color than what they are on or how they come out of the jar. We're going to go ahead and start wiping some of this back off of the metal grommets and the metal piece on the front, as well as doing some sanding to kind of get the distressing started on this. It's so funny how this looks a lot different dry than wet. All right, so we have rubbed back a lot of the paint. We have wet distressed it. I'm going to continue doing that, and I'm going to take one of my palette knives and just put some of it on the back of the knife and like flat blade it across these high spots. I'm going to be using several different colors to do this. I dry that a little bit and I go in and add a little bit of white wax to kind of see how that's going to affect the look of that blading that I did on there. The blading is way too harsh and I'm not sure if I want to tone it or rub it back. I just know that I want to leave it on some of the high spots. Once I finish some of that, I'm going to go ahead and take this palette knife and start scraping down to that natural wood because I want this to look distressed back to the wood in some areas and then also chipped. And the best way that I found is to kind of scrape some of it back. And as you scrape or use a tool to get some of that paint off, if you use your wet washcloth or paper towel or whatever, it just really helps clean that area up and moisten that paint to get it to move back even further. I am using a Oh Holy Night sign. I'm pretty sure this is a Hobby Lobby special. This was only $2, I think, maybe $3. I like to pick these up because I like to use them to make other things because you just can't go out and buy blanks for this price. So don't forget that when you are thrifting. If you see a shape of something or a quality that you want in a sign but you don't like what's on it, go ahead and pick it up because you can turn it into whatever you want. We're going to use this sign for a base to make a piece of artwork. I ordered some canvas art off of Temu. There are plenty of websites you can order really reasonable artwork off of and upcycle them into something that looks more expensive or that it is more expensive. So this poster that we're going to use is of the different types of owls, but I want to put it on something that you can hang on the wall. So I'm using the sign, I'm painting the inside of it, well, it looks like I'm painting all of it. I think this black from Folk Art as my base to go behind my types of owls. Now I'm only painting the outer skirt or edges of it because there's no need to paint underneath, it's going to be covered up. After I painted that black, I went ahead and painted the trim of this with that acorn in the Dixie Belle color. And now I'm going to go ahead and take this StazOn, I think this is like a dark gray, and just go around the edges of this because when I get this attached, I don't want it to have white edges, so I'm just going to kind of make them a dark color so they will blend in with the black paint. We are going to be using hot glue to get this attachment started. What I'm going to do is just put a very thin line at the top of this to hold this in place, and then I'm going to use my Titebond Quick and Thick to technically decoupage this piece to this frame. Now, I'm not going to do anything once I use the Titebond. I'm just going to attach it that way and kind of hot glue a little bit around the edges just to hold it down, but I'm I'm going to let this dry, and I'm not going to use any decoupage medium over the front of this piece because it already has a sheen to it, and the glue on the back is going to hold this down perfectly in place, so it's not necessary. This next project is a huge piece. I'm showing you, it is a box. I purchased this at a Goodwill. It almost looks like it's an Asian piece because of the hardware that's on where the handle used to be. It is split wood and it's got a huge stain in it. So it's going to be repurposed and it's going to stand upright with a knob on the top. I am super excited. So what I started doing was I started using just some white chalk paint to paint the bottom of this because I knew that this was going to take, or this, that I was going to put a piece of decoupage paper on it. My vision for this is for this box to be green. So I started out with some Monet's Garden, the DIY paint, in a deep green because this dries a lot lighter, and I have a photo here that I'm going to show you all of what I want this box to look like when it's finished. I love this. It looks old, it looks dirty. I found that off Pinterest, so that was my inspiration piece. I knew the stain in this box was going to be a problem, and here I'm showing you that it definitely was something very greasy or very sticky. So I went ahead and, and I'm showing you that it cracked naturally. I'm going to seal this with some Mod Podge to hopefully get that sealed in to not cause me further problems. Once I got those places covered, I decided to go ahead and put some Mod Podge to do a crackle effect on some just random areas of the box. So you'll see here that I'm putting it, like I said, just on random areas of the box. Once I did that, I added some of that white chalk paint on top to give it a contrasting effect. I went ahead and used the candle wax method again on this box in certain areas as a resist, which it really wasn't needed as many layers as I did coming up. It just didn't matter. It was unnecessary. The next step is to add some of the black velvet paint over this box to give it another layer that's going to be underneath some of the greens and over top of that white. We're not going for full coverage. We're just going for another color to show through the sanding and the distressing back. As I do this, I'm going to be using my heat gun to go ahead and crackle some more of that paint. To help smooth and make a thin layer, I'm also using some water to mist that with. This is where the whole experiment is coming in. Now that our Mod Podge that was sealing that nasty stain has dried, I'm going to go ahead and go back in with some of that original Monet's Garden green paint to cover that up. Now that our black velvet has dried, we're going to go ahead and bring back some of that original green color through by wet distressing as well as using a small fine grit sandpaper. What this does is it leaves a little of the black behind, it leaves a little of the white behind, and it leaves a lot of the green behind. This was in the very early stages of trying to figure out how to layer this to get it to look similar to that picture that I showed you all. So I really wasn't sure. I just knew that I needed to layer a bunch of stuff to get my base and go from there. And I really wasn't happy with how the white kept showing back through so thick. So this gave me the opportunity to sand that white back even further to get just a hint of the white coming through for that end look. Now I'm just going to distress all over the sides of the box, the edges, and trying to work on those as I go along. So I'm not ending up with all the outside of the box done and none of the inside of the box done. All right, so here we are at the dried stage after doing that distressing back of the black, and we have several layers including the original color. Now I'm going to start adding that more of a yellow green to get that final look that I want. I'm starting off with the Fancy Farm Girl, I think that's what that's called, of the DIY green. And I'm going to go ahead and put a light coat over that, wiping back to as I go to continue to have some of those other layers come through. In addition to that Fancy Farm Girl, I'm pretty sure this is some aviary that I'm adding as well to give a couple different green tones on top of the original Monet's Garden. You can definitely see how these colors are starting to dry a lighter, more yellow tone green. Now that those have dried completely, we're going to go ahead and go in with the Gypsy Queen color, which is an even more yellow green, to give that. There's a patch on this toolbox that is very yellowy green and almost centered and then has drips. So we're going to use the Gypsy Queen to give us that look. So I'm not going to put it on the whole outside. I'm just going to kind of center it, and I'm going to keep spraying it with water to give that drippy look like the original photo. You can water down the paint and do like a wash, or you can just add it on there thickly and then keep spraying until it becomes very drippy while brushing with your brush, as I'm doing here. I'm pretty much going to do all the sides with this color and this effect. Once I get the outsides of the box done this way, I'm going to add some of this green to the edges and do a wash on the inside of the box as well so that it is more of a cohesive look. On the ends of the box, I just do a wash. I don't do the drippy here, but I do end up doing it at the end. Now, you can see we have our box and it's dried, and I'm going to go ahead and put a coat of clear coat on this because I'm going to do some black waxing and some black washing, and I want these under layers not to be very easy to remove. I will remove some of them, but I don't want to just wipe them back all the way through. So this is going to give my base a seal so that I can control how much I want to remove. So I started out with black wax, the DIY black wax on here, because I thought that would give me the look that I wanted. And I quickly realized that was not going to do it. It was going to have to be the black wash. And you'll see that coming up. What I end up doing is black waxing over the piece, and it does give it a beautiful look. It actually tones that green down a lot. But once I realized that I needed to do a black wash, I go back in with my sander and I do sand this black wax back so that the black wash can stick to it. All right, so I've already sanded back some of that black to give it a dull finish so that I can do some washing on this. Once you wax something, it gives it a repellent, just like a wax would on your car. So I needed to sand that back. I went ahead and did that. Now I'm mixing some of that green, the Gypsy green, and then the Queen Gypsy or Gypsy Queen and some of the black velvet. I've mixed both of those with some water to make a wash for these. During this process, I go ahead and I alternate between the Fancy Farm Girl and the Gypsy Queen as well as the black wash until I get the look that I want. You will notice that I do use my heat gun to dry after I put the wash on because it slows down the dripping. We want the dripping, but we also want it not to all drip, if that makes sense. We still want the drips to show, so if I hit it with that heat gun, it slows it down and dries those drips in place. Now that our outside has dried, we're going to go ahead and sand some of this back to bring some of those other greens and to do a little bit of wet distressing. You all, this process was long and I loved it. I loved it. I shouldn't say it was long. It was just many things done over top of each other, and I love the whole process. I love the experimenting. I love the outcome. I don't know what else to say other than this was just so joyful to me. I hope you all are enjoying this as much as I was recording this. So look at those colors coming through. Once we seal this, that is what it's going to look like. It's showing you this wet. So what I wanted to do was, instead of those drips being so perfect, I took my sander, sanded through them, and then I took my damp rag and wet distressed them to give them imperfect looks, like they had aged. Okay, so now we're going to seal up this box so we can go in and see if we need to do any waxing or really what the colors look like. You're not going to know that with the DIY clay paint until you seal it, unless you don't plan on sealing your piece. If you like the lighter colors with less definition, you wouldn't seal it. If it's something that you really want to see those colors come back, you're definitely going to want to seal that, because that's when those true colors come through. To finish the inside of this box off, we're going to use Roycycled. This beautiful vintage typewriter decoupage paper is going to be on the inside. Now I decided to go ahead and put this to where when my box was standing up, that the original knob would be at the top and this would be vertical. You'll see. I was not sure how I really wanted to do this, but after I decided to use my box to stand up or to hang up, the placement of this just fell into place. I did trim this back to fit the box. What I'm using is some Mod Podge. I'm going to put a light coat on and use the saran wrap method, where I just, once I put the light coat on, I'm going to only do it in sections, and I'm going to use my saran wrap to smooth it out as I go down. Once I finished my box, I decided to go ahead and do some stenciling on both outside pieces that would be showing when standing. So I have these ruler stencils I got from Jamie Ray Vintage. I have this brass part of a lamp, and I'm using another one of those vintage spigot or water spout knobs or faucet knobs, whatever you want to call them. And this brass plate, I really wanted to add some of that black velvet paint to it to give it a more aged look. Even though it's brass, it's still not patina enough to go with my project. So I'm just going to give it a couple coats of this, sand it lightly, and then seal it with that tough coat. While I'm waiting on this piece to dry, I go ahead and use some of the black velvet paint watered down to cover the back of this piece. If you can look there, you can see all the drips from where we did the sides. So we need to go ahead and make that back look professional. I want some of those drips to show through, so I'm just going to lightly spray this with some water and put a light coat of that black velvet on the back of this piece. I do go ahead and seal that as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and wet distress some of this back, bring some of that brass back through, seal this piece, and we're going to use a screw to attach this piece because it's going to end up in a place that is not where either of these holes are because I center it. And the center of this drawer doesn't have that hole. So it works out perfectly. This brass piece covers all those extra holes, which I didn't mind because I love that it makes it seem like it's a architectural salvage piece. But I really wanted to cover them up with this made up knob or put together knob. I do go ahead and black wax both of these pieces because the brass was still a little bit shiny coming through. So I dark waxed over the pieces and I sealed them both. Okay, last but not least on this box, we're going to take some of this dark wax. When I put the paper down, it left an edge just a little bit that kind of went up on the walls of the drawer. So what I did was I went ahead and took the black wax and went all around those edges to blend them with the wood and to hide that edge, that raw edge. And then also to give that typewriter or that piece a vignette or like a shadow box style, I went ahead and rounded the corners off a little bit, and you'll see that coming up. If you are still here at the end of this video, give me a heart or type a green heart or type the word heart in the comment section below, and you rock. Thank you so much for watching this compilation video, and I will see you in the next video.